Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Kids Independent Media Production. Today is a very interesting adventure to me, which is basically, what does it mean to need to change a drum head? We're going to talk about snares today because they probably get changed the most. Let's see what happens. Drum heads are an interesting thing. They can look worn out when they're not, and they can be worn out and still look fairly new. And the snare drum, being kind of the center of the set, exhibits both of these things, in my mind, more than any other drum on the kit for a couple of reasons that we're going to get into. But first and foremost, what we're talking about is, when do you change a snare head? When do you change a snare side head? How do you know that it's time to do it? The funny thing about a thing like this, and this goes for guitar strings and other parts of other instruments too, is that the slow decline of the quality of the sound over the life of the drum head, in this case, is such that you don't really notice what you lost until you put a new one on and go, oh man, I forgot what it sounded like when I first put it on there. I'm coming from the idea that this is my snare drum. I've been playing it for, I don't know, a year, 2 years, who knows. I've been playing it a lot. It's been to tons of gigs. And I am looking at it and saying, it looks like it's worn out. It doesn't necessarily sound like it's done, but I want to know what happens if I change it out. All right, let's hear it a little bit in context and then we'll talk about it. As far as it goes, it sounds like a snare drum. It's doing the things that snare drums do. Just because I know it has a worn out head on it, I can hear that it's worn out, but I would also, if I heard that, think to myself, oh, like, there's some things lacking in there. If that were my drum, I'd want to tune it slightly differently or maybe change some things out. And again, because of that slow decline over the life of the head, the little things that get lost, they just kind of float away and you don't know that it happened. Really quickly, I want to do a little demo from just the edge to the center, both with snares on and snares off, to kind of show not just the sound of the drum in the kit, but also exactly what the heads are doing right now, sort of in a vacuum. Now again, there's no red light going off that says that this head or these heads are shot yet. You know, there's not like a Best Buy date or anything on this. But since I've changed heads on this drum recently and we've put a few different heads on here, I know that there's some high end missing, the overtones are a little wobbly, the area closer to the edge of the drum sounds really different than the area at the center and feels different. Also, it feels a little spongy out here and a little stiff in the middle. And overall, the dynamics I'm expecting to come out of it are not happening. If I sat down and I played this drum, or if I saw it in a store, for instance, and I was like, man, I want to get a Supraphonic, and that one's affordable, I would definitely want to change those heads when I get home. I'm seeing and hearing all of that here. Now, let's start with the batter head. Some of the things that we're hearing, especially in the sort of isolated little hits there, is some kind of wishy-washy pitch instability going on. When you have a fresh drum head at tension, it's a very smooth surface, it's a very even surface, and it's evenly tensioned in the different zones. We know that the edges always sound a little different than the center, but in terms of it being kind of like a clean sweep from the center sound to the edge sound, when you start to wear out a drum head, you start to have areas of different kinds of tension. It's almost like, hammering on a cymbal or different things like that, where certain spots act like nodes that are just going to break it up a little bit. And it starts to sound a little less clean. It starts to sound a little more janky, a little more trashy, a little bit more difficult to tune, especially with the overtones. And also kind of difficult to keep in tune, because when you're trying to kind of like compensate for those spots that aren't working so well, you can end up with some lugs being dramatically looser or tighter than others relatively, and those can work loose and cause all kinds of problems. So I know that engineers and other musicians watch this kind of stuff. If you've ever had a guitar string that was being weird and you took it off and there was a kink in it because somebody like knocked the guitar over or something, you're like, man, all the G's on that string sound weird. It's the same kind of thing. It's a matter of just even tension over the whole thing so that it can operate as a single unit. Coating wear and also just general dirt and muck on the head is a visual cue that the head's been on there for a while. However, if you don't play brushes at all, it takes a very long time for the head to get dark and have a kind of like big color change. You'll see marks in the coating from the sticks, but brushes are like the prime offender for actually getting a lot of kind of brown and black, sort of dyeing almost onto the drum head. That doesn't necessarily mean that the head is worn out. It just means that there's a lot of stuff on it, which will undoubtedly affect the sound to some degree. But it's not an immediate sign that the head is worn out. And when it's at tension, a lot of the things that are actually affecting the sound aren't really readily available to see because they're being stretched out. There could be dents in the head, there could be a lot of other things. But this drum right now has a pretty dirty batter head on it, and there's a lot of muck on it that right away tells me, because I can see that some of it is also like stick strikes and not just like general stuff from the brushes, that it's been hit hard and a lot, and also not just in the center, but all the way to the edge. If you are a brush player, which I am for sure, and you use a textured snare batter, which most brush players do, you are going to experience somewhere from maybe too much coating sound and like scratchy stuff at the beginning to almost none as the coating wears off or wears in. Different drum heads, different brands, different coatings, they all wear differently, they all get dirty differently, they all behave differently under the brushes. But that is one thing for me where a brand new head is sometimes too much, and I'll almost want to like get some of that off depending on the type of head that I'm using. And then on the flip side, when the head has had all of it worn off, you're actually not getting much in the way of a lateral swish sound with the brushes, which can be problematic, especially if, like I do, you use brushes in situations that are on a higher volume threshold. It's not just jazz ballads, but maybe country music, maybe like modern pop stuff, or just situations where you want that broader sound, but at a slightly lower volume threshold. Moving to the snare side, this is a little bit trickier, but there's kind of like one giant thing to look for, and that's basically whether or not the hoop is bottomed out and is almost like flush with the edge of the drum and where the head actually is. Because the thing about a snare side head is it's razor thin, they stretch a lot over time no matter what you do, just from playing the drum. So if you're looking at the bottom of your drum and you're starting to see that the hoop is getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the bottom of the drum, that's a good sign that the thing is stretched out a lot. Because when you replace it, you'll discover that there's actually, a similar height to the hoop as you would see on the batter side of the drum. That's the thing I see most, especially in backline kits and practice studio kits in particular, is people just tuning that thing up and up and up and up and up, trying to maintain some semblance of snare sound. As it stretches out, it becomes unusable at lower tensions because there isn't enough tension on the head because it's stretched out to hold a pitch and throw anything back through the batter head to you and generate a good sound. I change snare side heads more often than batter side heads because I'm not a super hard hitting player. I know other people for whom it's the opposite. A real quick way to look is to just see if you're having trouble with the height of the snare hoop getting close to the drum, or conversely, if you try tuning the snare side back down a little bit because you want that kind of sound and you run into wacky noise in the snare wires or overtones that don't make sense, or if it makes it difficult to tune the batter head once you've done that. All right, so let's throw some fresh heads on, tune it up, and we can do a little bit of a comparison between where we were and where we're going. tuning up the fresh heads was way, way easier. And I gotta say also that they stayed put once I tuned them. I didn't have to fuss with them in between takes. Often when we're recording here and trying out different things, we'll notice the tuning moving over the course of a few hits or a few minutes of playing. The fresh heads, by virtue of the fact that they're level, and so the hoop is level and there's more even tension around, they're really staying put nicely. There's a lot more clarity in the snare wires. There's a lot more air in the sound in general. There's more overtones in the batter, which is kind of part of it because it's working as a unit to make the low and medium and high parts of the sound. And the drum is louder significantly, both in terms of the rim shot and in terms of the clarity of the quieter stuff. Additionally, with the worn out heads, there's a loss of rebound because the head is sort of working against itself to try to resonate for you when it's not even across the entire surface. So little rolly things, little doubles and things like that, they're easier to play. They're more comfortable to play, especially if you like to utilize the rebound of the drum. And they have a little bit more sustain to them, which is really satisfying versus the kind of choked out thing that was happening initially with the first set of worn out heads, where you'd hit it and it would kind of die super fast, which is an interesting sound. And there are some drums that do that, like it's a sound that you might be after. But in this case, it just felt a little bit limiting and kind of uncomfortable. Now let's talk about preventative measures. In the past, we've talked about how to make sure that you're not pitting out your drum heads, which is to say hit them as flat as you can. Don't over-tension them often and bring them back down because they'll stretch out a little bit faster. Choose the drum head that is right for the music you're going to be playing. You don't want to get razor-thin heads and then hit them with 2Bs all day. Like, they're just not going to survive. Additionally, a couple of little things you can do. One is mine and one is Ben's, actually, that I learned about today. Mine is just a Snare Side thing, and it's that I write the date that I put it on there. And if it's a drum that I use with any degree of consistency, I just change it every 6 months, because just being on the drum under tension with a head that thin is going to stretch it out whether you're playing it or not. And if you're using it consistently, it's definitely going to have a marked improvement if you change it after about, somewhere between 6 and 8 months, something like that. You really can do that to any head on your drum set. It can be good just to know when you did it also, because it's just kind of interesting to know, frankly. Like, you can get an idea of how long your heads are lasting you, and whether or not you need to move up to something more robust, or if you could go to something thinner. Now, the other thing you can do, which is super interesting, and I'm totally going to do now, especially on the snare side, is take a marker when you put the new head on and actually just mark a little line along the edge of the head, kind of right near the bearing edge, so that you can actually watch the head stretch over its lifespan and watch that little mark slowly move over the edge of the drum and disappear behind the hoop. That's a really clever way to actually see this process in action and understand that that material is finite, but it's trying to do the job that it was doing at the beginning at the end, and it just can't do it after a certain point. This is also why natural heads, kangaroo, calf, things like that are so interesting, because they're fibrous, they're not, mylar, so they have a much longer lifespan, but they're also much more prone to stretching because of weather conditions. So there's a whole other set of maintenance you have to do for things like that, which we have some old videos that you can watch that go deep into that too. So the bottom line is, you don't have to change your drum heads all the time, but it's such a boost in sound for a relatively small investment. I find it super inspirational. I also really enjoy the process of taking my instruments apart and taking care of them, because we do kind of work together to do the thing that we do together. And changing heads, changing wires, tuning, all that stuff, it's kind of like relationship building with the instrument, and it feels like taking care of it. It's a pretty long time that the average player can play a drum head before it physically breaks, like splits or, pulls out of the hoop or, what have you. But coming as we do from a place of thinking about sound and thinking about integrity of sound and knowing that you're going to get what you want out of the drum when you sit down to play makes it worthwhile, even if it's scary. Like, even if you're pretty okay with the sound you have and you don't want to risk not being able to get back to it or a better version of it, a little practice goes a long way. And it really does help us to stay inspired, especially since most of us are kind of playing by ourselves right now, and maybe recording ourselves more than we used to, or really taking the time to delve deep into the sounds that we're making. All right, thank you so much for watching, sticking with us. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and click the notification bell so you get notifications about our new videos. We're still doing tutorials every Tuesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, in addition to product spotlights, snare spotlights, exclusive cymbal series over on the Patreon. Jump over to the Patreon if you haven't already. Follow the link below. There's a lot of stuff on there, and we're finally getting into the exclusive, exciting, deep dive into the well about cymbals. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and yeah, I'm super excited. And lastly, I know a lot of people out there don't sweat changing their drum heads. A lot of my jazz friends, a lot of people I know that even play like pretty heavy music, they'll, get their pinstripes or whatever, put them on there and just be like, I'm good to go. And it's not that they're not, it's just these are options. So your stories about the lifespan of heads would be interesting, not just to us, but also to the other viewers and other commenters, because this is kind of a community thing to get behind, like the idea that it's okay to change your drum heads and that it's not scary, and that at the same time, you might be getting more life out of them than you realize. Some of us maybe change them too often. Who can say? But let us know, and we'll see you down there.